Welcome to Ali Fitness Podcast, a weekly production all about bringing health into fitness. Professor Marc Cohen is on a mission to realise worldwide wellness, bath the world and help people tame their toxic load so they can live long, healthy, happy lives. As one of Australia's pioneers of integrative and holistic medicine, Dr. Marc has been at the forefront of the wellness revolution for more than 3 decades through teaching, running events, publishing, research, clinical work, and community engagement. Professor Marc Cohen is a registered medical practitioner with 2 PhDs, and for the past 16 years, he's been Professor of Health Sciences at RMIT University in Australia. This is where he supervises research into wellness and holistic health, including studies on nutrition, herbal medicine, yoga, meditation, saunas, hot springs, lifestyle, elite athletic performance, the health impact of pesticides, organic food, and detoxification. In fact, I think it would have been just quicker if I told you what he didn't do. In addition to the landmark textbooks, Herbs and Natural Supplements, and Understanding the Global Spa Industry, Professor Cohen has published nearly 100 academic papers and written multiple books, chapters, and articles on holistic health. As a frequent speaker at national and international conferences and festivals, Professor Cohen delivers inspiring information and uplifting presentations that inspire positive action. Dr. Marc, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Ali. I'm happy to be with you.
I tried to sort of make that bio as quick as I could because I've got to tell you, you win the award for the longest, perhaps most educated professor we've had on.
Well, I've spent 30 years at uni.
So there you go. Look, it's really great to have you on the show. As I said to you, it was so hard to work out what to talk to you about because you've got so much knowledge on all of these areas. And I know our listeners are extremely, inquisitive on a lot of those topics. But I'd really like to explore with you your discoveries with respect to extreme wellness training. And I know you've done a lot of work with Wim Hof. So perhaps you can start by even sharing your understanding of wellness versus illness.
Yeah, well, it's continually evolving understanding. And I first went into medicine to understand wellness. That was my whole intention of studying Western medicine, was to learn how I could be healthy myself and how I could have the happiest, healthiest life. And as I've matured and learned more, I've realized, the depth of it. And the best understanding I've heard about wellness and wellness is about we and illness is about I. So illness is about isolation, it's entropy, it's closed systems, and it's very self-absorbed. Wellness is open systems. It's about we, it's about what you can give, it's about community. And illness and wellness exist on a spectrum. And you can move up and down that spectrum according to your lifestyle and according to your environment. And that's, I've created a model where that spectrum is visualized as a vortex. It's like imagine a water going down a plug hole or a tornado. You've got the wellness up high where there's a lot more movement going around and a wider diameter. So you've got a greater range of flexibility, a bigger homeostatic range. You can do more when you're well. You can adapt to stress. You can get more engaged with life. And when you're ill, your life contracts down and you can do less. And in this axis of homeostasis, axis of stillness. So whether you're ill or well, you still have this point of balance that you can achieve, which is what we talk about, the still point of meditation. It's the point where you say namaste, the stillness in me, or the place in me and the place in you where the whole universe resides. That stillness is the same in all of us. So that's a sort of a conceptual model I've been using and it's still developing. And as my understanding grows, my focus in my life grows, because now I started medicine thinking I want to learn about the body so I could be well. And now I realized I'm going to be well. For me to be well, I want everyone around me to be happy and healthy and well. So now I'm on a mission to realize worldwide wellness, not because it's an altruistic thing. It's going to make me the happiest. If I can have the biggest impact on the world and if I can make everyone around me or help them become well, that's going to be the best thing, most fulfilling, enjoyable life for me.
I really love that analogy too. You speak and write about the 5 elements of life, nature, rhythms of transformation and breathing. Can you sort of go into those?
Sure. Well, that's also an evolving understanding. I'm still learning about this. And I first came across that. I came across in Greek philosophy, the ancient Greeks and the humors they talked about. And then I studied Chinese medicine. They talked about the 5 elements where the whole universe and, the organ systems and the emotions and the seasons and the tastes and the tissue types are all related to, metal, water, wood, fire, earth, as a metaphor. And then I studied martial arts. I did a particular martial art, which was also a healing art that was based on these 5 elements of Chinese medicine, which talks about cycles. There's a creative cycle and a destructive cycle, and your organs have a relationship. And Chinese medicine is built on that understanding. And then about 10 years, I came across a dance practice, 5 Rhythms, which was started by Gabrielle Roth, who was in New York. And that has the same, or it's got same structure, 5 elements, but rather than having a cyclic relationship, they have a linear transformation relationship where Gabrielle noticed transformations in nature go through flowing, staccato, chaos, lyrical, and stillness. And those rhythms govern transformations, whether it's birth or the human lifespan. And you can actually move through those in a dance practice where you have music that goes through flowing, staccato, chaos, lyrical, and stillness, and they call that a wave. And nature transforms itself through waves, and water moves through waves. So you can look at a lot of different natural processes and see these 5 rhythms apply. And looking through that lens, I've been able to sort of blend, I guess, the timeless wisdom of Chinese medicine with sort of my modern understanding, and correlated things into 5 elements. So my interpretation of the 5 elements, I talk about the elements are in the basic equations of life, which respiration and photosynthesis, and the 5 elements that all our cells relate to, which is water, glucose, oxygen, temperature, and carbon dioxide. So that's they're the basic elements that all our cells relate to, and they're the elements that we can actually control. We can manipulate those elements using our knowledge of the external environment and our knowledge of our own body. So you can control, the water in your body. You can dehydrate or hydrate. You can control glucose. You can feast or fast. You can control oxygen. You can hyperventilate or hold your breath. You can control temperature. You can go into a sauna or an ice bath or a neutral bath. And you can control carbon dioxide by exercising and also some breathing practices, which maybe we can talk about, which actually happens during the Wim Hof method. So these 5 elements of biochemistry, I guess, can all be manipulated. And basically all of those things are necessary for life. So you can manipulate life and death situations for yourself, but do it under voluntary control in a very safe way. And that becomes really powerful for getting in touch with your tissues and getting in touch with your physiology.
Interesting. Well, that totally makes sense now why you got into the Wim Hof method. And I'd love for you to share with us, like, I guess, your experiences with Wim Hof, and also how, I guess, you took your body to extremes.
Yeah, well, I met Wim about 1.5 years ago now, and he came to Australia and ran some workshops, and a friend of mine who conducts his workshops in Australia introduced us, so we went out for dinner and we started talking about research. And I've done a lot of research in the past on breathing techniques. I've done research on the Buteyko breathing technique and a lot of different yoga pranayams, and also done research on yoga and sort of physiological research. And talking to Wim, it was like, wow, there's so much in his method. And actually the first thing we came up with was that there was a wealth of knowledge in the Wim Hof method community. He had 20 or 30,000 people that had done his 10-week online course at that stage. Yet we didn't know who those people were or what benefits they were receiving or what adverse effects they were experiencing. And at that time, I had a PhD student, James Clark Kennedy, who was doing his PhD on hot springs bathing and had just organised a global hot springs survey. And another PhD student who's a medical doctor, Joy Hussain, who's doing sauna research and doing a global sauna survey. And it wasn't a big stretch for us to organise a Wim Hof method survey. So we actually did that. And we're writing that up for publication now. But we got over 3,000 people responding to our survey, asking the people who are practicing the Wim Hof method, who are you? Why do you practice? How's it changed your life? How's it helped you? How's it hurt you? And that was really fascinating to do that work. But then talking to Wim and going to his workshops and really understanding or trying to figure out actually what's actually happening, because Wim discovered this technique. So Wim Hof, he's a Dutch sort of yogi daredevil, they call him, who discovered when he was in his teen years that he could go into cold water, and the natural breathing that happens in cold water, that hyperventilation, he could actually manipulate his own breathing and tolerate cold water, and that actually made him feel really powerful and gave him power over his body. And he developed the Wim Hof method, which is a series of mental focus, breath control, and cold exposure. And subsequently, he did all these world records. He climbed Mount Everest and Kilimanjaro in his board shorts and ran marathons in the Arctic Circle and in the Namibian desert, and did all these incredible feats, which brought global attention to his work. And trying to understand what happened. So I started doing that practice. And it's a really simple breathing practice. I break it down into the 5 rhythms or the 5 elements, but very simply, you just breathe as much as you can for a couple of minutes, then as little as you can. Hold your breath for as long as you can. And then that's a super simple version, and we can break that down. But so I started doing this breathing technique, but I did it with an oximeter. So I bought myself just a fingertip oximeter and looked at my own oxygen levels and pulse rate. And then, I'm a bit of a geek and, did all this breathing research, so I know a bit about respiratory physiology. So I tried to unravel what's going on during this breathing practice. And then for me, the other revelation was going to the cold. And just before meeting Wim, I'd been touring through Europe on a hot spring tour, visiting a whole lot of different hot spring resorts. And there was one particular beautiful resort in Langenfeld in Austria that I went to that had a waterfall experience, which was dumping 320 litres of ice water on your head from 6 metres high. And, I've always been into bathing. I love hot springs. I love bathing. I love water. But I've always been a hot water guy. I've always loved, hot bathing, not freezing water. And this was a revelation because after, in 5 seconds, of 320 litres of ice water on my head, which, a bath and a half sort of full. Basically, you get an adrenaline rush like you've done bungee jumping or skydiving or something, and you're buzzing for a couple of hours afterwards. And you're feeling your whole body starts tingling. And basically, you've gone through this life or death experience, but you've survived it and you feel great. And that switched me onto the cold. So when Wim started talking about cold, I started experimenting with that as well. And in Melbourne in winter, I have a swimming pool that gets down to about 8 degrees centigrade in winter. So I'd go out in the morning, I'd do my breathing practice, lying in bed, then I'd go out and spend 5, up to 10 minutes in my swimming pool at 8 degrees. And it's really quite amazing how quickly your body adapts to cold. Our bodies are built to adapt to cold. It's only been very recently we've had central heating and air-conditioned cars and environments. So, when winter would come on and each day would be a little bit colder, our bodies would naturally adapt. And you can recreate that by gradually exposing yourself to cold. So I've been experimenting that with my own body. And then Wim Hof invited me and my 2 sons to climb Kilimanjaro with him. And he wanted to do that in 24 hours in board shorts, as he does. So we started training for that. And then when spring came and my swimming pool got a bit warm, I had to buy an ice machine for my bathroom so I could start putting 50, 60 kilos of ice in the bath and having ice bars. But it's not necessary to go to that length straight away. Just doing hot and cold showers is really effective. And I've started going around talking to people about how to do that and realized that a lot of people have, like me, like I used to have an aversion to the cold. And there are ways to make that a lot gentler and easier. So one thing I've done is create a little song and a dance I called the Cold Water Hokey Pokey. And it's a way of just making a hot and then a cold shower very easy to tolerate. And if you look into hot and cold showers, they call that a Scotch shower in the spa industry or in the bathing industry. And that's Ian Fleming wrote that James Bond would take a Scotch shower every morning, which is sort of a really hot shower followed by a full blast cold shower. And you can imagine the cold showers in Scotland would be pretty cold. And if you do that, what happens is you have the hot shower and you vasodilate. So you've got about 100,000 kilometers of blood vessels. And in the hot water, they all open up. The smooth muscle around those blood vessels aren't normally under our control. They'll open up when we exercise and to deliver more blood, but we can't voluntarily control those. But if you go into the heat, they'll all vasodilate. And then you go into the cold and they all vasoconstrict. So you're giving this 100,000 kilometers of smooth muscle-lined blood vessels a workout. But when you do that in one hit, it's quite shocking. So what you can do is if you do a really hot shower first, and then just very gradually just put the cold water on and just wet your left foot and leg, and then your right foot and leg, and then your left-handed arm and the other-handed arm, and you keep breathing calmly and smile to yourself because that's what it's all about. And that's the first verse of the Hokey Pokey song. And if you do that first verse, what you've done is you've pushed or you've vasoconstricted the blood vessels in your arms and legs, and you've pushed a whole lot of extra blood into your core. So your core is still warm. In fact, you've now got extra blood flowing through all your organs because all that vasodilated blood vessels in your arms and legs have constricted and pushed that blood in. So then you actually, even though you've your arms and legs are cold, you're actually feeling a bit warm. And then you put your left side in, and then your right side in, and then your front side in, and turn yourself around. So you're gradually exposing your body to the cold. And the real secret to it is in the chorus, which is you keep breathing calmly and you smile to yourself, because that's what it's all about. And what happens when we normally go into cold, the cold takes over our breathing. We start to gasp and hyperventilate. And that's actually the breathing pattern of panic, of anxiety. So if you can overcome that consciously and you realize you're doing it yourself, you're putting yourself into the cold. It's not a dangerous situation. There's nothing to get anxious about. It's just cold water. You can get out at any time. Once you realize that, you can just breathe calmly. And once you start taking over control of your breath, as Wim Hof discovered, you get mastery over your body. And then the third verse goes into your head. So you put your whole head in, shake your whole head around, stand still, get a drenching, slowly turn yourself around, continue breathing calmly, smile to yourself. That's what it's all about. And then you sing the Hokey Pokey song. You let the cold water go on your pulse points, on your groin, on your armpits, on your neck, and on your kidneys. And you'll find it takes about a minute and a half, and you can dance around in the cold water. And it's been a gentle introduction. And I do that every morning now. And some mornings I don't feel like having a cold shower, but I'll turn the hot water off and I'll start just to do my legs and my arms. And by the time I've realized that I've done my whole body into cold water. And there's some emerging research that shows even 30 seconds, a minute of a cold shower after a hot shower is really beneficial. And there was one study done in the Netherlands, inspired by Wim Hof, where they got 3,000 people to do showers, and they randomized them to either have a hot shower with no cold shower or a 30-second, 60-second, or 90-second cold shower after their hot shower. And what they found was that the people who did the cold showers after a month had 29% less sick days than the people who just had the hot shower alone, and that over 2/3 of the people who had cold showers would continue. They loved the experience and they would continue doing cold showers. And what they found also was that it didn't matter if it was 30 seconds, 60 seconds, or 90 seconds, just having the cold shower after the hot. And they did this in winter time in the Netherlands. So the cold shower again was 12 degrees or 14 degrees centigrade. So it didn't really matter that it was you don't have to expose yourself for a long time, but after 30 seconds even, if you're in the cold shower, you've had to overcome that gasp reflex. So you've had to stand in the cold shower and relax your breathing. And I think that's part of where the power comes, that you've actually taken control over your physiology and you've put yourself in what's an uncomfortable situation and you've remained comfortable in that. And there's a lot of physiology that happens, as I say, with the vasodilation and vasoconstriction, but there's also a lot of psychology, that the fact that you're putting yourself, you're actually consciously putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation and saying, I'm going to be okay in this. I'm going to just be relaxed. And we do the same thing in yoga, where, in yoga, you'll put yourself in an uncomfortable situation where you're at the end of your stretch and you just breathe and you just be there and you be comfortable there. And even you can do the same thing in a sauna, where, you've been in a sauna for a while, it gets really hot, and then you get to the edge of your comfort zone where you're just breathing and being there, and it's a forced mindfulness practice. But it's, even though it's both hot and cold are life and death situations, if you do it for too long, you can damage yourself. But if you're in control and you can leave any time, you can just breathe and be there and experience this forced mindfulness practice where, and I talk about when your mitochondria and your mind are on the same page, where all your cells are aligned with your psychology. And that's a really powerful place to be in, because your whole being is working together as a single organism. And that's often rare in modern times when, your body's doing one thing and your mind's doing something else. So, yeah, these are powerful practices. And, I'm still learning about it and experiencing that. I've sort of codified that into this sort of what I call extreme wellness training, where you manipulate these 5 elements of, water, glucose, oxygen, temperature, and carbon dioxide.
That's fascinating. And look, I'm really interested in, I guess, going through the benefits of it. I mean, you mentioned so many, such as adrenaline rush and mastering your body, which I love, that breathing and the calmness breathing and just being able to maintain that. And like you said, just mastering your body. But you also mentioned, that was interesting, about the 29% sick day difference. And I guess that comes down to helping your immune system somehow. Do you know, is there any evidence around the immune system? You also mentioned that it just helps generally with I guess, energy. What are the other benefits? And maybe you can tell us a bit more about the immune system if there is any benefit there.
Sure. Well, I mean, we're still understanding this. There's a lot of research that needs to be done. But there was particular research that was done on Wim Hof it's all been written up in peer-reviewed journals. And this is a research on the immune system. And there's a particular test they used to test immunosuppressant drugs. And it's a test of the immune system. So what they do is they inject you with the lipoprotein of E. coli. So it's the outer shell of the bacteria, the lipid shell of the bacteria of E. coli. So it tricks your body into thinking you've got a blood infection. And normally, if you've got a blood infection, your immune system goes crazy, and for about 3 or 4 hours afterwards, you start having fevers and sweats and chills and body aches and muscle pain. And then your body realizes you don't actually have a bacterial infection, it's just the outer coating, and it goes away. So they actually, and it's not a nice thing to do to people, but they do that as a test of the immune system. And then they test immunosuppressant drugs. These are drugs that people go on to suppress their immune system to see if these immunosuppressant drugs will work. So this is a standard clinical test for testing drugs that will suppress the immune system. They approached Wim Hof and said, and Wim said, look, I can control my own immune system and inject me with the E. coli and the lipoprotein and I won't respond. And they were very skeptical and they did that. And what do you know? He didn't respond. He got a little mild headache, but no reaction really at all. And that was astounding for this, that Wim could control it, because no one had ever thought that you could consciously control your immune response, whereas Wim obviously could. And then Wim said, yeah, and Wim's, he's an amazing man. He's discovered this in his own body, but he's got incredible confidence in his own ability. And he basically said, look, they said to him, you're just a freak. No one else can do this. You're the Iceman and go nearly 2 hours in an ice bath. How do you do it? But no one else can do this. And basically he said, I can teach anyone to do this. And they said, well, how long will that take, your training? I said, a year, 2 years? He goes, 4 days. I'll teach anyone to do this in 4 days. And they were very skeptical. And he took a group of naive people who had never done his method for 4 days. He took them away to his training facility in Poland and got them to do a lot of the breathing. And then they ended up climbing Mount Śnieżka, which is a ski mountain. It's a 3 or 4 hour hike in minus 20 degrees. And they did that in their board shorts. And Wim, said once he saw them all climbing up this mountain in their board shorts in minus 20 degrees and all being happy and controlling their own physiology in the cold, he knew they were ready to do this test. So they went back to the university in the Netherlands. They got injected with this lipoprotein of E. coli, and what do you know? They didn't react. Their immune systems were under their voluntary control. And that's been written up now. And that was quite astounding, because it shows that his method of breath control and cold exposure can help suppress immune responses. And in this article that it was in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences was written up, they talk about that this method may be a solution for people with autoimmune conditions, with Crohn's disease or rheumatoid arthritis, etc., because it does suppress the immune system. And one of the ways it may do that, and we're still unraveling this, is that when you do the breathing technique and the cold exposure, you get this adrenaline response. And when you get a surge of adrenaline, your immune system gets suppressed. It's like you don't want to be healing your body when you're running away from the tiger. When you're running away from the tiger, you've got the adrenaline and your body's totally mobilized for action. It's only later on that your immune system gets turned on. So when adrenaline gets released, your immune system gets actually suppressed. So that's perhaps one of the thing. And they noticed that when you're doing this technique, you get a high adrenaline response, and that, as I say, that bungee jumping, skydiving response of the cold water, and that has a whole lot of effects on the rest of the body. And the other thing I've been learning and experiencing is that stress is not the enemy. There's a lot of literature around how stress is bad and that we want to control it. And we do mindfulness meditation and relaxation and all of that. And that's really to address chronic, uncontrolled stress. So there's a lot of stress on us from the external world that is not under our control. And that's low-grade stress, and that leads to a cortisol response. So we get this adrenal fatigue. Cortisol is always turned on because that's the long-term sort of anti-stress hormone. And that isn't good for us. But what Wim has discovered and what I'm learning is that if you have acute stress that's under your control, that can be really a positive thing. And we naturally stress out, but going for a run is stressful. And if you think back to our ancestors, running was actually a life or death experience, because if you were really running, there's probably someone was chasing you to try to kill you, or there was a tiger or something trying to chase after you. So running is a stressful situation and potentially a life and death situation. And when you go for a run, you damage muscles and you have this inflammatory response afterwards. But if we do that in a controlled way, we train our body to cope with stress that's out of our control. And in the same way, if you expose yourself to cold, or if you do the breathing technique and you expose yourself to hypoxia, or alkaline and acid conditions in the body, which you can go through with the breathing technique, that's quite stressful, but it's stressful in a very short time frame, and it's stressful that's totally under your control, because you can just decide to stop running whenever you want. You can stop the hyperventilation or the breath hold or the sauna or the ice bath whenever you want. So you're in control, and by exercising your adaptive mechanisms, by causing stress, and when I talk about these 5 elements, these are the adaptive mechanisms that just aren't in our whole physiology. These are going down to every single cell in our body. So you're affecting how our mitochondria work, or even the number of mitochondria. And there's a process called mitogenesis, where you can make new mitochondria. And that can happen much faster than you can make new muscle cells or do cellular repair, because mitochondria can turn over, one cell might have tens of thousands or even more mitochondria within it. And if you increase the number of mitochondria in your cells, suddenly you become more energy efficient, and the cells become literally more powerful because they've got more energy to exercise.
Sorry to interrupt. Is there scientific evidence around that cold actually does increase the mitochondria?
Absolutely. And I guess the most obvious one around that is with brown fat. So brown fat is when I was studying medicine, we learned that brown fat was in hibernating animals and small infants, but it wasn't in human adults. And then recently we've discovered that, brown fat is a tissue. It's like white fat, but it's around your great blood vessels, around your heart and lungs. And it has many, many more mitochondria. And that's why it looks brown under a microscope, because it's so dense with mitochondria. And these mitochondria are thermogenically decoupled. Instead of making ATP for cellular energy, they just make heat. So brown fat's like this little furnace that's around our big blood vessels that keeps our bodies warm. And what they've found is that if you do cold exposure, and you want to get to the point of just before you're shivering. So if you've gone into musculoskeletal shivering, you've gone a bit too far. But if you expose yourself to cold, you'll induce brown fat production, where the fat cells around your great vessels and your central organs will vastly increase their mitochondria. And the interesting thing about the metabolism of brown fat is that it preferentially burns white fat for fuel. And that's because white fat is our most dense energy source. And again, if you're in winter and you're running away from your tiger or whatever, you want to save the glucose and glycogen for your muscles and doing things immediate. You don't want to just use all that valuable fuel source just for generating heat. So brown fat's one of the only tissues that preferentially burns white fat through these thermogenically decoupled mitochondria.
So have you yourself seen actual weight loss by doing this? Or fat loss, I should say?
Yes, I have. It's that there still needs to be research on that. And there is research showing that, if you do cold exposure, you'll increase, thermogenesis, you'll burn more fat. However, it also increases your appetite, so that the net calorie loss is individual. But overall, people do lose weight. But what I've noticed myself doing the Wim Hof method is that I need to eat less. You become much more efficient with the energy you burn. So, I'm very happy on, one decent meal a day. And, this is just my own experience. And I think there's a lot more research that needs to be done. It's probably going to take scientists another decade or more to unravel what Wim has discovered through his own body. But yeah, you notice that your cells become more efficient. And I think that's also primed with the breathing technique. And the breathing technique, I think, is perhaps even more powerful than the cold exposure. What you're doing then is you're going through what I call the 5 phases of breathing, and you're taking your cells in a very short period of time through the extremes of oxygen, carbon dioxide, and pH. And that ends up being a powerful exercise, because once your cells get starved of oxygen, they have to then adapt very strongly. And the cells that they're a bit malformed, they're aberrant, they're aging, they're precancerous, their metabolism is not so efficient, those cells don't survive and they get recycled. It's called apoptosis, so programmed cell death. So the other thing that happens within those cells, if you've got cellular processes that aren't that efficient. So you've got what happens is, proteins get malfolded and they're not working that effectively. When you go to the extremes of your physiology, it becomes really noticeable to your cells that, hey, those proteins aren't working well, let's recycle them. So that's a really powerful process to regenerate your cellular machinery and become more efficient in how your cells metabolize.
I'm interested too to ask you, you mentioned your sort of protocol of training where you sort of spent 10, I think you said 10 minutes in an 8 degrees Celsius pool. And you also mentioned that there was no clear evidence between 30 seconds in the shower versus 1 minute versus 90 seconds. What's the benefit that you know of spending as long as 10 minutes in a pool?
Well, again, there's not good research to point to on this. Mind you, athletes have been doing this for a long time, for recovery, and, contrast bathing or, ice bathing after intense exercise is done quite widely in the athletic community. In fact, one of my PhD students is Lauren Burns, she won the gold medal for Taekwondo at the Sydney Olympics. And part of her PhD research, she interviewed a whole lot of serial gold medalists. So her cohort were all Olympic gold or world champion gold medalists. And she was asking them about their lifestyle practices of what kept them at the top of their game for a long time. And one of the things that was really constant was ice bathing as a practice. Now, the research is a bit equivocal. I mean, there is some evidence that shows that, cold is a fantastic analgesic and anti-inflammatory. We know that. I mean, you talk to anyone who does first aid, they'll tell you straight away, if you sprain your ankle, you put on ice. So as an analgesic and anti-inflammatory, it's really effective. However, so if you're, intensely training and you're causing inflammation, an ice bath will reduce that inflammation. Now, that may not be a good thing for some people. So if you're trying to build muscle mass, you want to cause microscopic damage to your muscles, and that inflammatory process that happens afterwards helps you build new muscles. So that you may not want to go into an ice bath. You may want to let that inflammatory process take its toll and generate new muscle growth. But if you're wanting to recover quickly, an ice bath will reduce inflammation and reduce that pain if you've done intense training. So, and I don't know, what's like in New York, but in Australia now, cryosaunas are becoming all the rage, where you go into a minus 160 degrees centigrade chamber that's air cooled by liquid nitrogen, and expose yourself to a couple of minutes of cold, and that is claimed to have many benefits for inflammation, for analgesia, for tissue regeneration, etc. And I think that there still needs to be a lot more research, but there's no question that it has a profound effect on your physiology. And one of the things that that really came across to me was that it's a forced mindfulness practice. And that breathing that I mentioned, when you go into cold water, normally you'd hyperventilate and you recreate this body chemistry of panic. And this is actually an issue for some people who have done the Wim Hof method, where it can actually re-trigger past trauma. Because what I like to say, there's issues in our tissues. So if you've had a past trauma or a panic situation, and you breathe, you hyperventilate, that causes alkaline environment, and because you blow away your carbon dioxide, and that psychological trauma can get sort of trapped in your tissues. And when you revisit that, if you recreate that body chemistry, you can reawaken, or just you recreate that memory of trauma. However, if you're doing it in a very controlled environment, you're in control of, and you can be calm, and you can keep breathing calmly and smile to yourself, then you can actually revisit that in a controlled way and overcome it. So I think that it's really powerful just to be there and have this forced mindfulness practice. And then I think there's also a difference, and again, this is my reading of the literature because it hasn't been researched, where you get the immediate effect of overcoming that hyperventilation, where you go into the cold and you've controlled your breath and you say, I'm going to be relaxed, I'm not going to hyperventilate, I'm just going to be relaxed in this cold situation. And that happens after 30 seconds. So you get that benefit. And that's what those people in that shower research happened. And then there's another benefit that happens when you stay in the cold as long as you can, or if you're not as long as you can, to the point where when you get out, you don't shiver. And that point will actually extend. So maybe only 1 or 2 minutes the first day, and then the next day might be 3 minutes, and then 4 minutes. And I noticed that with me and my sons, where we'd go into the cold, and the first time they did an ice bath, it was only 2 minutes, and then the next day they did 3 minutes and did it easily. And when you get out, the coldest point is actually not when you're in the cold water, it's about 5 or 10 or even 15 minutes after you get out that you feel the coldest. And they call it after drop. And the reason why you get that is when you're in the cold water, you get peripheral shutdown. So your arms and legs will vasoconstrict and the blood will stay in your core where it can keep your organs warm. So when you're actually in the cold and if you're breathing calmly, your hands and your feet will become the coldest. And that's why you get frostbite in your toes and fingers, because it's the very periphery that shuts down the blood vessels the most. But your core actually stays warm. And it takes, to get hypothermia, true hypothermia in cold water, it takes half an hour or more.
Does that depend on someone's, say, body fat percentage and how cold the water is?
Well, it does, but even an untrained person in Arctic sort of water will take about half an hour before they sort of succumb to cold water. And if you've trained, you can prolong that. So 5 or 10 minutes in cold water, you'll get really cold, but your limbs will vasoconstrict first, and your core will stay warm. But then what happens when you get out of the cold water? That warm blood that's in your core will start to circulate through your cold limbs. And if there's any, the little bit of blood that's in your cold limbs will start to go back into your core. And when that blood mixes, that's when your body temperature drops. And if you're doing cold training, I don't think there's any benefit, and you actually may damage yourself if you get to the point where you're actually shivering. If you've got musculoskeletal shivering, then you've gone too far, and I don't think there's any advantage in that. But if you get to the point just before you're shivering, it's like telling your body, hey, winter's coming, we better get prepared, you better adapt, you better, start building brown fat, you better start becoming more efficient in heat production. And that point changes. So it may be that you do the cold water hokey pokey in a not even such a cold shower the first day, or just do the first with your arms and legs, and then after a few days you can build up to your body, and then you can build up to your head, and then you can make the water colder and colder. So I think it's important you don't need to push yourself. It doesn't have to be painful, or it's uncomfortable but not unpleasant.
Okay,
but you'll find that you'll naturally adapt.
Is there a sort of temperature that's ideal?
Well, as I say, it'll change for each person as their tolerance builds. So I noticed that last winter I was going to my pool when it was 8 degrees, but then when spring came and the pool started getting warmer, I noticed when the pool got over 14 or 15 degrees centigrade, I was thinking, gee, I have to spend a long time in here to get the same effect. And that's when I started making ice. So it'll be different from everybody. And what I'd suggest is people start slowly. And certainly if you've gone to the point of shivering, then pare it back, either reduce the time you spent in the cold or increase the temperature a little bit of the water. But the exposure to cold is a powerful thing, but it's not just the cold, it's your mindset and your breathing as well. So you need to be able to make the decision to go into the cold, relax your breathing when you're in it, and then get to the point where you've titrated the cold to your tolerance, and to realize that your tolerance will build. And it's quite inspiring to see your own tolerance build, because you actually see, wow, this is I'm getting more used to this.
And that's an interesting question there. If your tolerance builds, is it like, say, becoming adaptive to, like, say, for example, running? You run for half an hour at a certain pace, but then if you continue doing that, your body doesn't actually get the same effects, and then you need to sort of run at a higher intensity or for a longer period of time to get the same effects. Is it the same case in this instance or not?
Absolutely. It is. It's because your body's adapting. Your body's becoming better and more efficient at doing that. And the only difference between running and cold is that adaptive processes. And one of the things with as I say, with the cold and also with the breathing technique, which is super powerful, is that it relates to every single cell in your body. Whereas running, you're training your muscles and your cardiovascular system, respiratory system. But with cold or with hypoxia or with alkalinity or acidity, then that's these 5 elements of biochemistry. You're really relating to all the cells in your body. So it's you're causing fundamental cellular physiological changes.
Awesome. So for our listeners then who want to perhaps experiment with this, they start off with the hokey pokey idea, and they get into, a couple of seconds, and then they build up to, say, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. And then they might do, say, a minute, and then maybe even get up to 90 seconds. And then say they do that several times. Would you have sort of like a number there that they should aim for? Or is there any sort of particular protocol that Wim Hof recommends?
Well, with the cold, as I say, start doing, and the hokey pokey is just a very gentle introduction. So you're just starting with your limbs, and then you go into your body, then your head. So, and building up that. But I would just say, as a regular practice, doing cold showers. it's a really powerful thing to do for anybody. And all over the world, there's people who, they call them the icebreakers, who go out and swim in the ocean all year round, and you find often they claim they don't get sick. So just as a general practice, I think cold is really powerful and a great way to start. The other really simple practice is this breathing technique, which goes through these 5 phases of breathing, and that can be done lying in bed first thing in the morning. It should not be done underwater or driving a car or anything, but it can be done in almost any other situation, and it becomes a really powerful practice to calm the mind, and you get this incredible sense of peace after that breathing practice. So that's the other thing I'd encourage people to do.
And how long does the breathing practice take, and how can we learn more about that?
So you can do different rounds of the breathing, and I can talk you through what I call the 5 phases of breathing, if you like. So it's essential that the 5 phases of this Wim Hof method breathing practice. And it starts with the flowing breath, which is just your normal flowing breathing, which you're not really thinking about it. It's just your breath going in and out without even having to worry about it. So we call that the flowing breath. And then you need to exert your willpower, and you start with the staccato breath, which is hyperventilation. And with the hyperventilation, what you're trying to do is fill your lungs as much as possible with a forced, quite, not super rapid, but quite a big inhale, and then just a relaxed exhale. And the aim of that is you're trying to flush all your lungs with fresh air and get rid of the carbon dioxide. And you might do that for 30, 40, or 50 breaths.
Okay, and do you try to extend that out breath for as long as you can?
No, it's a passive, relaxed out breath. So you're just using the sort of the elastic tissues, the rebound of your diaphragm and your lungs to exhale. So it's just so it's not super fast. Or, no, it's not panting, but it's a forced, relaxed panting, if you like. But that's a staccato breath. Backwards and forwards, yeah.
I think I've heard Wim Hof mention a few times that it doesn't matter about nose or mouth, it's just wherever the air wants to go. Is that correct? Or
Yeah, well, he says, doesn't matter which hole you use, just get it in you. Wim's great like that, very practical. If you talk to yogis, they'll say it's better to go in through the nose. Some people, their noses aren't that clear. And so this is more about just moving the air in and out of your lungs. You're flushing your whole lungs, and you're basically it's controlled hyperventilation, and you're reducing the carbon dioxide. And what that does is it makes your blood alkaline, because most of the acid in your blood is carbonic acid, which is from dissolved carbon dioxide. So by reducing that carbon dioxide level, your blood becomes more alkaline, and you'll start to feel dizzy. You get a bit lightheaded. You start to feel tingly. Your blood becomes cooler just from the panting effect. So you might feel cool. Often you get tingling around your mouth or your fingers, or buzzing around your ears. And when you've got to that tingly phase, it might take a couple of minutes to do that. Then you're ready to go to the next phase, which is sort of the chaos breath of just breath hold. So then you just breathe out, not forced breath out, just a comfortable breath out. And when your lungs are sort of comfortably empty, you just hold your breath. And then you'll find that you can hold your breath twice as long as you can normally, because the normal signal to breathe isn't low oxygen. The normal signal to breathe is high carbon dioxide. So that's normally gives us that urge to breathe when the carbon dioxide builds up. So if you've reduced your carbon dioxide by this hyperventilation, you just don't feel like breathing for a long time. And I've done this with many, many people, and even people with no training whatsoever will comfortably hold their breath for 2 minutes after doing this practice. But
wow.
The time is not that important. What's important is just getting to the point where you've held your breath until the point where you need to breathe again. And there's some little things you can do to extend that, but at that point where you need to breathe again, then you take a big breath in. And if you want to prolong that, what you can do is you can take a big breath in and then a big breath out again, and then hold it again. And at the end of that breath hold, you become quite hypoxic. And you can look at, if you take an oximeter reading, you'll see your oxygen level can go down to 60 or 50% saturation, which is normally it's around 97%. Or it'll go up to 99% when you do the hyperventilation. So you're going from really high oxygen and low carbon dioxide during the hyperventilation to the breath hold, where you get really low oxygen and really high carbon dioxide.
Mm.
And then after you've released the breath, you've done the breath hold. So maybe you've done 2 minutes of hyperventilation, maybe around 2 minutes of a breath hold. Then you do these recovery breaths where it's quite joyous. You feel relaxed, okay, and you start to feel your breath, settling down into a normal rhythm again. And that might take another minute or so. And then that's the lyrical phase of breathing. And then you enter the stillness phase of breathing, where you'll find that your breath and your pulse and all your physiology just settle into this sort of homeostatic balance. And you'll find that your mind becomes really quiet, that your pulse will drop. And I find my own pulse will drop maybe 10 beats per minute below my resting pulse. And I don't know of any other practice where you can get your pulse, voluntarily, 10 beats per minute below your resting pulse rate. So what you've done is you've really relaxed your physiology. You're barely breathing. Your pulse is slow. Your mind is quiet, and you can just enjoy this really peaceful breathing phase. And that's a great time to start meditation. Or then you enjoy that for a couple of minutes, and it's really quite blissful. And then you can do another round. So the practice might involve 3 or 4 rounds of this, going from just the flowing breath to the hyperventilation to the breath hold, to the recovery breath, to the peaceful breath. So it only takes 5 minutes, 6 minutes to do a round. And if you do 3 rounds, it's 15 or 20 minutes. You can do it lying in bed. And it's really quite a profound workout for all your cells.
That's awesome. And thank you for sharing that with us. That's great. Have you ever actually measured your HRV before and after?
Yeah, I have been measuring HRV, although I'm still playing with different equipment to get the best measurements. We published some research on HRV and yoga with one of my PhD students, and with doing the Wim Hof method. Yeah, I mean, I'm noticing HRV changes, but I'm not that confident to talk about the results yet. Until I know that what I'm getting consistently, and I'm just playing with different equipment at the moment to try and do some research on looking at HRV responses. You get quite profound because of this drop in your heart rate. So my resting heart's 55, but I'll do a round of breathing, goes down to low 40s. That you're actually increasing your HRV quite dramatically, but you're also getting these other changes as well. So it's quite complex what you're doing. And the other thing is you're actually doing like a high intensity interval training, because when you're going hypoxic, you're forcing your cells to burn anaerobically. So you're getting this very short period of anaerobic respiration. So then you're building up lactate, and then the lactate increases, and then you reach your lactate threshold, and then you start breathing again. And there's this really interesting episode during the hyperventilation phase where you're actually getting hypoxic, even though your cells or your blood is fully saturated with oxygen. When you're hyperventilating and your carbon dioxide is low, the alkaline environment and the slight cooling of the blood that happens when you hyperventilate, it shifts the hemoglobin oxygen dissociation curve. So normally hemoglobin binds to oxygen, and that the strength of that binding changes according to pH and temperature. So if you consciously change your pH or consciously change the temperature, like you do with cold or sauna or with hyperventilation, because that cools the blood, you can make hemoglobin bind stronger to oxygen. So even though your hemoglobin is fully bound, it's not going to let go of the oxygen. So your cells are actually hypoxic. And during that phase, you also get a rise in lactate because your cells are burning anaerobically. And then once the lactate rises enough and you get lactic acid counteracting the alkalinity, pH drops again, oxygen gets released from the hemoglobin, and then you pay back that oxygen debt. So you get these 2 periods, one at the start of the hyperventilation and one at the end of the hyperventilation, or also the end of the breath hold. So these 2 periods where your cells are quite hypoxic, and it's like this high-intensity interval training effect where you're training your cells to tolerate lactate, and your whole cellular mechanics, your mitochondria, are forced to become really efficient.
Has there been much sort of research around VO2 max and this type of breathing?
Not that I know. There has. I mean, there's so much research that needs to be done. And there's a lot of extrapolation, and I've tried to extrapolate my knowledge of sort of respiratory physiology and cellular physiology of what's happening. But there's so much research that has to be done. But one of the analogies that I'm sort of working with is if you imagine when you're comfortable at home on the couch and people are bringing food over and you're relaxed, that there's always an abundance of food and you're relaxed and you don't have to do much, that in the back of your fridge, or that you get a whole lot of food that ends up past its use by date, and your fruit bowl might get some moldy food in it, and you get some the fruit flies will come and things like that. Well, it's the same in your cells. If your cells are always super comfortable, there's always heaps of glucose and oxygen around, that they can have proteins that get past their use-by date, and free oxygen radicals, heaps of oxygen that doesn't, it's extra, so we can start doing radical things instead of what you wanted to do. But if suddenly the food stops coming to your house and you start getting really hungry, well, you go through your fridge and you throw out the food that's bad and you eat the food that's not, and you start sorting things out. Well, your cells do the same thing. If suddenly there's no oxygen coming to your cells, they start to mop up any free oxygen radicals, or they start to see the things that are past their use-by date, the proteins that are misfolded, and they autophage them, and they use the materials for building up new proteins. So it's a recycling process, and that becomes a wake-up call for your cells to become more efficient. And I think that may be contributing to the reason why by doing this technique you don't feel like you need to eat as much, because the food that you do eat becomes really efficiently metabolized.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Look, I'm wary of your time, Dr. Marc, and I really appreciate all this information that you've given us. I've got to ask you, though, how was your hike?
We haven't done it yet.
It hasn't happened.
We planned to do it in January.
I thought it was in January.
That's right. So it was planned for January, and there was going to be a whole video documentary done with some movie stars were coming. We were going to coordinate research, and then the end all fell through. So now we're planning it for September. So
was it too cold for you?
Well, no, I mean, apparently September's a little bit of a better time, but no, I mean, I was really keen to do it. Although for me, it was like, I'm not that interested in getting a world record or doing 24 hours in board shorts, but to go to Kilimanjaro with Wim Hof and my 2 teenage sons and some other friends was going to be an amazing adventure. And so we're planning that for September. Hopefully Wim will still make it, and we're going to do some research around that. And there's still a whole lot of research that needs to be done around high altitude sickness, because again, the respiratory physiology that happens in hypoxic environments is not fully understood, and it's very hard to predict who's going to get altitude sickness. Yet, Wim has this incredible record. I think he's done 4 trips to Kilimanjaro, and the success rate of getting people to the summit, even in very, very short times without acclimatization, is very high with people using his technique. Whereas normally I think it's, around 50% of people getting to the summit of Kilimanjaro, even when they take their time, because at 18,000 feet, there's less than half the oxygen at that level, and people get altitude sickness. So there's still a lot of research that we need to do. So yeah, I'm still looking forward to September to doing the climb, and I'm happy to come back and tell you about it when it happens.
Excellent. And get some of your students to do some research on that.
Well, that's it. So we're looking at different devices. We can measure our HRV and our oximetry, etc., as we go up in altitude, and to understand that physiology better, because there's still so much we don't understand just about basic cellular physiology. And I'm learning about it on my own body, and working with the Wim Hof community, and they've been great sharing their experiences. And this research we did on the survey, where people are getting really profound changes in very serious diseases. We'll be writing, this will be published soon, but people are reporting, really serious diseases are getting either cured or, hugely benefited in terms of, chronic pain. PTSD is an interesting one, because some people say it does revisit their trauma, but then it helps them overcome trauma. So these are people, by doing this, you're taking control over your physiology in a very, you're causing stress, but in a very controlled environment. And by doing that, you're training your body to adapt to stress that there might be outside your control.
That's awesome. And I really look forward to all the sort of papers that you got coming out, especially that survey you mentioned with the 3,000 people that have done the Wim Hof training, because that's going to be interesting. So I'll put all your information in the show notes so that people can follow you. And I assume that they can go to your website to find out all your new papers that are coming out.
Yeah, well, I've got about 100 academic papers that are all available on my website. I've just posted a lecture about the science behind the Wim Hof method, and there's some, a download of a PDF that people can get from the website. And be sure to, I'll update that. It's just drmarc.co, so people can go there and learn more.
Excellent. Look, we'll definitely include that. And just before I let you go, I've got to ask you a bit of a personal question. Do you have a tattoo?
No, I don't. No tattoos.
Have you considered it in the past, or?
Not seriously, no. Nothing that ever. Yeah, I mean, I'm when I study Chinese, I don't wear jewelry and I don't have any tattoos, so it's like I figure my body doesn't need adornment.
Very good. It'll probably freeze off anyway.
Yeah, I don't know the effects of the cold on that, but yeah, no,
excellent.
no tattoos.
Thank you so much for coming on. And we didn't even touch on most of the things that I know we could have talked to you about, but really appreciate your insightful information about the breathing and the cold exposure.
Well, great to talk to you, Ali, and hope your listeners enjoyed that, and maybe stay in touch. I'll tell you about the hike when it's done.
Yes, thank you very much. For all the resources and show notes from today's episode, please go to www.ali.fitness. If you liked today's episode, please show your appreciation by going to iTunes, give us a 5-star review and subscribe.